My name is Stephanie LaRue. I am the Associate Director at CSREA, the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity in America. CSREA is an interdisciplinary hub that aims to build community with the public and among students and scholars working on race and ethnicity in and around the United States. We invite you to learn more about our programming on our website, www.brown.edu/race. Today's event, entitled Fear of a Black Universe, an outsider's guide to the future of physics, is a book talk by Professor of Theoretical Physics at Brown University, Dr. Stephon Alexander. This is the final installment of a 4-part new book talk series this semester, which highlights new and notable works that help us to better understand how we study, research, and engage with questions of race, ethnicity, and indigeneity. Our host this afternoon is Dr. Christopher Rose, Professor of Engineering and Associate Provost for STEM Initiatives at Brown. At this time, I'd invite Dr. Rose to introduce our guest. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Stephanie. And hopefully I'm not that guy that doesn't have his microphone on or the video's not working or whatever. In any case, as Stephanie said, I'm Chris Rose. And Stephon Alexander is a colleague of mine here at Brown. And we've gathered here at Brown to do wonderful STEM things of the crazy variety. And Stephon is, one of our leaders in that regard. As Stephanie said, he's a professor of theoretical physics here at Brown. He's also, because you got to have a kind of a little bit of swing and sway if you're going to do the hard stuff in describing what the universe is. He's also a jazz musician. The thing that I like most, though, is that he's also a New York homeboy. He grew up in the Bronx. I grew up in the Harlem and the Bronx. So, we're just hugger-mugger all together. He's the current president of the National Society of Black Physicists. And he came to Brown after a stint at Dartmouth as a big deal chaired professor, where he set up this program that took kids, undergraduates, especially from first gen and from underrepresented groups, and moved them in towards physics and other STEM fields. And he recreated that here. He was the founding director of our Presidential Scholars Program here at Brown. Now, again, he does the jazz thing, but he also does other crazy stuff. For example, he was the technical advisor for A Wrinkle in Time, Ava DuVernay's movie, that classic book. He's been on Nova, and he's talked to Neil deGrasse Tyson and all that other good sort of stuff. But the thing that I like most about Stephon is that he's a physicist. And what that means is, in the best possible way, he thinks about how the universe is composed. What is in the universe? What puts it together? And to do that, you got to be a little crazy. You can't think inside the box, because the secrets will never be revealed unless you push the boundaries of what's known. And that's what this book is really about. So Stephon is going to tell us more about the book and how he got into it. And with his provocative title of Fear of a Black Universe, let me introduce my friend and colleague, Stephon Alexander.
Well, Chris, thank you, Professor Rose. I'm speechless. I'm humbled. I'm grateful. There's nothing greater. I mean, to be recognized and loved by your colleagues, and especially my colleagues that's across campus at CSREA, something that's a center that's dear to my heart. And let's go at it.
So, I guess, the way I'd like to do this is, can you tell us about the process by which you came to write this book and what the book is about? So let me just give a high level arc synopsis of what's there. The book is primarily, for those who know a little bit about physics, there was a famous physicist, Richard Feynman, Caltech, and he had a way of engaging folks and talking about physics in a way that encapsulated what was happening at a high level, but then the details were also there. And he was a very creative, curious guy. So your book reads very much like one of Feynman's books. You talk about the real physics, You give good examples for folks that don't understand, that are not physicists in particular. But then there's that extra little bit of flavor that you put in the book. So if you could kind of tell us about the process by which you got to write the book, what you think the book is about, and we'll take it from there.
Wow, yeah. So it's really, I mean, you clearly read the book, Chris. I mean, what I really mean by that also is, it's actually a funny story about that. Let me tell a quick story. My book, actually, one of the greatest joys in my book was, it was kind of a nod to Fear of a Black Planet, and then we'll get back to that. And so the big dream was to get Chuck D to give me an endorsement, which was like a dream. And so my boy, Will Calhoun, the jazz drummer for Living Color, is friends with, anyway, I don't want to get into that, but anyway, Chuck D, when my publicist reached out, they were like, the book is coming out. Can we please get a thing? Are you going to do it? He goes, I need to read the entire book first. And then he gave me this great endorsement. So that was another person that actually read the book. And that's connected to what you actually realize about the book. I grew up reading, when I was that kid in the Bronx, like growing up, like dreaming of, to be a scientist, it was Feynman's books, like Surely a Joker, Mr. Feynman, and his other books that really, and the storytelling, and also his voice, the fact that he spoke in his genuine, Long Island accent voice, the son of from a working class. He didn't hide behind that. He didn't try to perform something else. And that was the thing that really captured me and inspired me. And made me feel like, wow, I'm the son of I'm from the Bronx. I'm come from a working class background. Maybe I too can be, I don't have to be something else. But also, since the book was written in that spirit, and in the spirit of our great tradition, African-American tradition of storytelling, the griot tradition, I wanted to, I was like, I'm going to tell some stories here. I'm really like going to be, my grandfather was a preacher man, I was like, I'm going to tell some story, but I got to keep it real. So that's kind of like definitely one of the inspiration points the book was anchored in that Feynman way of expressing ideas through storytelling and having your own genuine voice.
Okay, thanks so much for that. Now, I was going to save things for a little bit later, but one of the things that you talk about is creativity and thinking way outside the box. But, that's almost a trope when it comes to the sciences. People say you got to think outside the box, and that's bled its way into just general society. But given who you are and where you're from, you had special challenges, maybe that other folks didn't have. So there's kind of a sly subtext to the title, and you do mention such things explicitly in the book. So if you could talk a little bit about that, and let me be very explicit about being a Black man, Black boy, Black man who wanted to become a physicist when, frankly, you're not supposed to. You're supposed to play basketball, Stephon. Don't you know that? Or run.
Yeah, I mean, that's so much to unpack there. And I definitely, in the writing of the book, tried to unpack the affect of that issue that you raised there. And let me see, where do I begin with that? The subtitle is the out. Yeah.
Let me help just a little bit,
yeah,
maybe,
help,
maybe,
yeah.
and it may be help. It may be help, and I may be sinking you. I don't know yet, but I guess I'm of a generation. I was born the year Sputnik went up, so a lot of effort and money was put into science because we were afraid that the Russians would attack us. That's really what what it was about. So physics was king. Plus, after World War II. And the use of atomic bombs, which was a direct result of quantum theory and relativity, physics was king. So when I got old enough and I kind of began to understand what relativity was, it was one of those things that if you had to, you couldn't just go and do what people had done before. You had to expand the way you looked at things. So you had a very nice description in the book about how Einstein came to his special relativity conclusions. And if you could kind of weave that into being who you are and how we're going to make the next big breakthroughs in physics by thinking in these broader sort of ways and incorporating more people into the thinking. So I don't know whether I helped or hurt at that point.
Yeah, you know, that's right. The book was definitely a book not just about like what, you know, the content of physics and what's known about physics. The book was also about, you know, how physics is actually done, how it's discovered, how it's created, how new knowledge, not just physics, but I was trying to expand outward beyond physics. So as we talked about like other issues, other things in the sciences. And I think that, you know, Albert Einstein, yeah, I mean, you know, Einstein, for example, very much saw, he would use whatever tools he had available, including mathematics, but he wasn't restricted to math. And he would come up with thought experiment. He would literally imagine the most absurd experiments that can't ever be done. He would imagine these experiments and use these experiments and as a device to basically find and expose paradoxes or expose anomalies that that would help eke out new basically ways of perceiving reality. So, for example, you know, his famous elevator experiment, like, you know, he imagined.
Could you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so the idea, this is what he called the happiest thought of his life, what led to the major breakthrough that now leads us to GPS technology. The effect of the warping of space-time came from this following idea. Einstein, you know, I tell my students too, like if you take a physics class and you don't understand a concept, it's probably because you're like more like Einstein, because he questioned like the dumbest things that you shouldn't question. So he asked himself the question, wait a minute, Galileo tells me that two things fall, no matter how heavy it is, it'll hit the ground the same. No matter, I can drop a feather and I can drop an elephant. If it's falling without air friction, they both will hit the ground at the same time. That's weird. And he questioned why that was. It wasn't, so Newton gave a half-baked answer to that, but Einstein basically really questioned that. So he created a thought experiment to expose the culprit. Okay, and what the thought experiment was, so imagine yourself in an elevator, all right? So this elevator is like a prison. This is a bad analogy, but it's a bad analogy for a brother to be talking about, right? All right, so you're in an elevator, so you cannot see or hear anything. You're in a sense deprived elevator. You can't see outside, you can't hear anything, you don't know what's happening outside the elevator. All you have is a ball in your hand, and you drop the ball, and you hold the ball up and you drop it, and you conclude, yeah, I'm sitting on a mountain somewhere on Earth. Somewhere on Earth, I'm just sitting there, and the ball drops. Then Einstein creates a thought experiment to say, actually, what if you're in outer space and there's a rocket booster? So if you're in outer space, there's no gravity, you're supposed to be weightless. But if you're in a rocket booster and the rocket is boosting in some given direction and accelerating, you too will conclude that a ball will drop. And so Einstein realized that those two situations, one situation, you're in a situation in outer space with no gravity and you're moving, and the other situation is that you're at rest on a planet, that they're completely equivalent. And then he realized the culprit behind that was that space is warped. And now why space is warped and that stuff, I go into that in the book. But that was the thing that led to the breakthrough. And then the mathematics kind of came. And one of the things that I kind of explored in this book is what other tools of investigation might we have to our advantage? And so the book, in a lot of ways, this outsider, the outsider's guide to the future of physics, was to realize that that tradition of like, you know, that tradition of placing yourself, placing your mind, placing your situation sometimes in an uncomfortable realm and embracing that discomfort can actually lead you to think differently. And so it made me realize that, you know, being an African-American scientist, for example, a scientist of color, actually places me, the discomforts that I may feel being in scientific spaces, actually it's to some extent, while, you know, it may suck sometimes, actually, I saw that very much being in the tradition of Albert Einstein and the Richard Feynmans and the Michael Faradays, that sometimes these ideas have to be ideas that may even stigmatize you. And that state of stigma, the state of being uncomfortable and not being accepted, may force you to think differently, but also that others should also embrace discomfort. So when we talk about diversity and things like that, we must also talk about the condition of where people are uncomfortable with that difference. But that is an advantage, and we should celebrate it. So my book was a celebration of the outsider in that tradition. I hope that helped.
That most definitely helped, and you know that rings big bells and resonates a lot with me, because I believe that I believe, and we've talked about this over the years. I believe that if you survive it, okay, because there is the issue for every Stephon, there's another 10 that through various vagaries of life and racism in society were shunted to the wayside, didn't make it. There's blood on the tracks is the analogy that I would use. So if you make it, you most definitely think differently, and I believe that that's a superpower that we should be harnessing. And you talk about that in the book, that it's that exactly that way of looking at things and being fearless. That's the other thing. You are probably one of the most fearless scientists that I know. You're not afraid to say something that others will perceive as silly. It's never silly. We already know that, but it could be wrong.
Right, exactly.
Right, but it's not silly, is the point. So, I'm completely with you when it comes to that. And you know that I also believe that once we begin...
embarrass you. I'm actually going to embarrace you because, you made a bad move of moderating this, so I'm embarrass you.
You don't want to do that.
Ago, I mean, one of the things that I really, that I think was special about our situation at Brown was from the day I came to Brown, Chris, you literally you would literally ask questions. I mean, you would literally ask me and Jim and like Brandon, your job was literally to make us uncomfortable. You ask us these questions of that was like, why is Chris banging his head this way? But I guess your function was literally about making us uncomfortable. And the fact was, it took us years to kind of come around. And let me say that the fact that we embrace that, it's so, and this is a very valuable lesson for students listening out here. Like when we give each other a hard time and we embrace that, and it's just like, yeah, it's sort of like playing 21, right? Or playing the dozens, right? It's the same thing. If it's coming from a place of love and it's coming from a place of respect, and your job is to literally throw, to do a hook shot on me or do or what have you, or throw the dozens on me, that discomfort is exactly what we need. So that's kind of like, where it's at. So that's this idea, I don't want you to be nice to me, you know what I'm saying? Like, bring it, because that's your job. That's our function.
Yep. And it is all love. And for folks out there listening, I'm an information theorist, so I believe that everything can be written in terms of information and the flow of information. And it turns out that the physicists believe it too, but not quite the way that I believe it. So Stephon's referring to my giving physicists a hard time about their basic formulations. And again, could be stupid, naivete. I'm just a dumb engineer, but this is the way you make the breakthroughs. This is the way you do things differently. Now, going back to Einstein, because I think folks are most familiar with the lay folk are most familiar with Einstein. The thing that was most startling about that, and you described the elevator experiment, but the sequela, which you said, and most of us, who are in STEM know, but the notion that space can change, can warp. I mean, that's something, we're talking about the 1900s, early 1900s here. That had to be something that completely blew everybody's mind. And people didn't believe him, really, until I forget who it was that did the expedition. Jim Gates, another of our colleagues here at Brown, talks about it in his book, where they saw that during a solar eclipse, that sunlight bent around the sun.
That's right.
During an eclipse. So, it does take a fair amount of bravery to posit something that completely blows everyone out of the water. You know, you mentioned also in your book, I think it was Faraday, that Faraday died a very unhappy man and may have actually, his heartbreak at his ideas about electromagnetism not being accepted may have contributed to his death. I mean, there's real peril in thinking outside the box. So, let's bring it back to you. How do you, I mean, you are definitely an outside of the box thinker. Do you feel that you are in peril, Stephon?
You know, I've definitely, part of the book too. I mean, I definitely explored the degree to which some of the, it came with this. It's a bittersweet thing. It comes. I don't consider. I guess I do sometimes consider myself to be an outside the box thinker, but so are you. But it comes, it's a bittersweet because it comes with its rewards, but it's penalties. And so that's why when I kind of looked at some of the events and some of the major breakthroughs and unraveled that, I realized I was actually in good company, and it did provide some solace. So for example, as you pointed out with Faraday, Faraday was one of the experimentalists, and it was interesting. He was like from a working class background. So class in England is like, there's a stigma there, and he wasn't really supposed to be theorizing, stay in your lane, do your experiments, you're a working class dude, you're an assistant here, but he did this experiment, which the classic experiment, which is weird, right? He took there's a magnet here, and there's a wire that can fall away, and there's no electric current flowing through the wire. But you move this magnet far away, and then you read and you see there's an electric current. And how is that happening? So Faraday came up with a theory for this. He goes, well, what's really going on, and remember, this is the day when they were burning witches to the stake, right? Luckily, he wasn't a woman, because they probably—
What are the years there, Stephon? Because I forget when.
Somewhere in the 1800s.
Okay. Early 1800s?
Early
to mid
1800s, yeah. Definitely before Maxwell, because Maxwell, yeah. And so the idea here was there was no understanding of this, because forces are things that happen when things touch each other. So how is it that I can create an electric phenomenon, which is electric current, from moving a magnet? And how it's weird that the magnet is not even close to the wire. So he's like, his theory was there are invisible lines of force moving through empty space. It's a sound of witchcraft and woo-woo. This is not, and what happened was his colleagues—
That's a technical term, everyone. Woo-woo is this.
Yeah, his colleagues call this idea idiotic, that this guy's an idiot, and it was laughable. And he was basically, he carried this kind of, what's the word? He wasn't respected because of this, because this idea was absolutely, ghostly, for lack of a better. It's like us saying, well, there is a poltergeist moving planets around the sun or what have you, right? And you're a scientist at some major conference. And it turned out that he was right. Not only was he right, James Clerk Maxwell basically used this field concept to unify electricity and magnetism and to predict the propagation of electromagnetic waves, which I would say is the basis of your field, Mr. Rose, Dr. Rose, electrical engineering, right? I mean, the first modulation of electromagnetic phenomenon led to the first radio signal that Marconi sent from Italy to Canada.
Yep.
Right. That was a prediction of Faraday. And so, and there are tons and tons and tons of ideas, just like exploring how the founders of quantum mechanics were reading Buddhist and Vedic philosophy. And that, that also inspired me to look into African philosophy as new ways of thinking about quantum mechanics. I had a student who was Africana, a dual major, Africana Studies and Physics, Jake Stanton, who did his thesis with me. And his thesis was about, West African philosophy and the foundations of quantum mechanics, for example. Only could be done at Brown University, right?
Right. So, I guess this notion of being an outsider, but still making the fantastic breakthroughs. You mentioned also in the book the notion. So here's an example. I mean, there are a couple of different examples. There's one that you mentioned in the book, something that Jim Gates, our colleague here, did with string theory that was essentially replicated by others later. And there's an issue of uptake of ideas from the outsider. I guess, another thing, I look at some of the work that you've done. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're one of the progenitors of mixing up in a serious sort of way cosmic inflation and string theory. And I have no idea how that's been taken up. So could you talk a little bit about uptake of ideas? Because a lot of the people, I assume that a lot of the people listening are young folk that are curious and interested and maybe want to become physicists themselves or be in STEM some way themselves. And it can be very frustrating when you have a brilliant idea that later proves to be truly brilliant. And there is a little bit of ego here. You do want to have some of the credit. So if you could talk a little bit about that, about credit assignment.
Yes.
And being an African-American person and credit assignment.
Yeah. So, one of the things I talk about in my book, I was trying to make this case and I was like, but I just don't, this is all, what's the word? Anecdotal. Like, you and I, we have colleagues, we have, colleagues of color and that we went through school with all the stuff and we can all confirm all the similar stories, but and one of the things I was really proud that CSREA was doing was engaging in this kind of research, right? Looking at anyway, to make a long story short. And luckily for me, a research article I believe it was in the journal, either Science or Nature, and Chris, you can tell our audience, those are amongst the 2 top journals in all of science. And this was a research project done by, the research had to be carried out by both the education department, the computer science department, and the psychology department. If I'm not mistaken, it was I believe it's all 3 of those departments at Stanford University.
Yes.
Yes, and it's called, and this paper used machine learning as well as the research in these other 3. It required, right? This is the case for interdisciplinary research. Right. To make this conclusion required 3 separate disciplines to come together.
And the journal for the audience was the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. That's where the paper
it was the Proceedings, which is also a great journal, right? It's like
top 3.
Top 3. And anyway, so this paper the title is called The Diversity Innovation Paradox. And here's what they found. They studied, I believe, in a span of 20 years, over 1 million women and scientists of color from their PhD dissertation all the way through 20 years of their career. All right, so this is not a small sample, right? So you can't be like, oh, well, this is anecdotal, the conclusion that I'm going to tell you right now, tell the audience. And they studied, and they asked the question using machine learning and these methods, how about the rate of innovation. And they had a very well-defined notion of innovation that I speak about in the book, okay? In a nutshell, innovation is roughly defined as you create a scientific tool or idea or concept, right? In your research that is used in other people's research, not just cited, but used to build on their research. Correct. So, but there's a much more well-defined thing I talk about in the book for the notion of innovation. And here's what they found, they found that this group of minority and women scientists, post-PhD, innovated more than the majority group. Mm-hmm. And then, so what's the paradox? The paradox is how come they're not being promoted and people don't know this? And so they go into why this paradox exists. And of course, so we can talk about stigma. We can talk about somehow, if you do something brilliant, and you look and talk and act a certain way, it's seen as crazy. But if another person does it, it's seen as, oh my God, that's like ingenious, out of the box. Like this is the next big thing. And I still don't yet have the language for this and how to really articulate it, which is why I'm glad that this is a kickoff for a deeper conversation with our students and colleagues. But anyway, I would like to hear your thoughts. What are your thoughts, Chris, about this phenomenon?
Well, I'm familiar with it was a Stanford group that did the paper and published in PNAS.
Okay, very good.
And I've been around. I'm an old dog at this point. I don't know when that happened, but somehow I became an old dog. And
Chris, you don't look it at all.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. The check is in the mail, Stephon. But I guess the bottom line is I agree with it. Simply looking at what my peers have done, the people that came through. I was part of the first wave, or at the end of that first wave of affirmative action, where folks that look like you and me were allowed access to the elite schools, and in numbers, as opposed to.
This is MIT.
Yep. Okay. So I guess the point is I'm completely in agreement there, and what we're trying to build here is build on that that outsider sort of status, but a different way of looking at the world that produces that sort of creativity, and begin to conjoin it. And again, that's something you kind of talk about in your book. Diverse groups do better work. So if you have a bunch of diverse thinkers that actually want to work together and tend to be broader than most, and that's another thing that I think came up in the study, that these individuals that were innovating were also broader. I mean, that's probably what innovation is. I think that that's a superpower. And I think that if we can demonstrate it as something that is productive, that will be something that, you, me, others that we bring into our circle can transport to other places. It'll provide a selective pressure for diversifying the sciences. And we'll see what happens, is the bottom line. But I agree with you.
An analog of this, I mean, to cut you off because I get excited.
No, please.
Is what one of my mentors, the great Leon Cooper, who was a rule breaker, who was a real outside the box thinker. Leon basically broke one of the most fundamental rules, which is like charges repel, unlike charges attract. What if like charges actually attract? No, you can't do that. That's not the law. That's not the rule. And he won the Nobel Prize for superconductivity literally by breaking that rule, right? And he said something to me when I was a grad student once at Brown, and he was a perfect example, I think, of when I talk about, here's somebody, a physicist of the highest order. I mean, his Nobel Prize led to several other it was a serious Nobel Prize that I'm sure Chris can attest to. And Leon, while I was feeling like, out of place and dumb and, not like that I belonged in the department, it was Professor Cooper that was like talking to me. He would, we'd take elevator rides, because he was on the 7th floor of Barris and Holly and I was on the 5th floor. And he'd always find himself in the elevator asking me questions. And when I took his advanced quantum mechanics class, like I felt comfortable sitting in the front room because he was always thought anything I had to say was interesting. When he's like, where is this coming from? The guy was so smart that and he once told me something, I'm going to paraphrase, and it was the following: why do I want to talk to somebody that knows exactly what I know? In other words, if somebody like that, who is a master quantum theorist, like is talking to somebody that also knows quantum mechanics or less than him, he's not going to learn anything new. So what drove him to talk to other people and even get involved in neuroscience and machine learning later on and biophysics is because he was, seeking out new terrain. And when that's part of what diversity actually is. It means, gaining other skill sets and tools that you're not going to find in your home field. And how do you do that? You got to talk to people who are different. Mm-hmm. And you got to get over your discomfort because of your projections that maybe the way they talk and the way they act and the way they dress and the kind of hair they have and what who they love and what have you, sort of like gets in the way of your discomfort. Well, you're not going to benefit. You're not going to learn something new. And all the great, I'm sure Jim Gates would say the same thing. Richard Feynman, Jim was a postdoc when Richard Feynman was a professor at Caltech. He was part of the group. I believe it was in the 70s.
Yes.
And Jim had a huge fro back then. And he said one time Feynman was like, man, I would love to get my hair like that, you know? I know it's like a joke, but it was a way of Feynman basically connecting and saying, you're one of us. And also Feynman would say your ideas, someone would come to him with some idea that they thought they were brilliant and they finally felt comfortable to tell Feynman the idea. And he would say, that idea is not crazy enough.
Right.
This is Richard Feynman, right?
Yeah. So, you know, I guess that's what that brings us to an interesting sort of thing. And I want to come back to it, you know, the outsider, stigmata, that sort of stuff. A lot of people, it's easier to go along, right? As opposed to subject yourself to potential ridicule. And the people that are good at bringing the new ideas into being somehow are inoculated against that sort of fear. And clearly you're of that, you know, you're in that tranche of people. So what do you think inoculated you? Because you were very frank in the book that it was, you know, painful sometimes, and you were ostracized by other postdocs, you know, when you were, I believe, at Berkeley. And there's some inner something that allowed you to not fold and go back to your second love of jazz music. So, you know, what is that, do you think? And let me preface this. I'm sorry to give you a little bit more time to think about it. This is something that is typical. You know that we run a series here called Thinking Out Loud, where we bring in some brilliant people, and you know, most of them have been of color, and we interview them. And we ask them, you know, what's their origin story? How did they become who they were? And each and every one of these people has some kernel of something that inoculated them against the headwinds that they would face. Whether they were Jill Tarter, who was a big deal physicist. She runs the SETI Institute, and she was not supposed to be an astronomer, let alone a PhD astronomer, you know, in her time, but she didn't care. She was inoculated somehow. Jim Gates, who grew up partially in the Jim Crow South, he was inoculated. So what inoculated you?
That's a good, it's a tough one. I mean, but let me kind of get at it from a different angle. I think definitely one thing that helped me carry the weight, because I think it's about, you know, we have to carry this with us throughout our lives. You know, we have to carry this weight, this extra inertia. And if I don't want to use the word resistance, because it's an inertia. It's
like a headwind.
It's a headwind, yeah. That's even better, a headwind. So for me, some of it actually had to do with my predecessors and mentors. So I think really seeing in people like Jim Gates and you, and you know, Trisha Rose, for example, because it doesn't even just only extend to science, but just being a Black intellectual for me.
Chanda, Nadia, Shirley Jackson.
Shirley Jackson. I mean, she was a big one because I met Shirley Jackson when I was an undergraduate. And she, you know, I saw her give a talk on quantum mechanics. I was like 18 years old. You know,
she's the reason Jim and people like me were at MIT at the time. She helped open those doors.
Right. And just watching Shirley be herself, just be Shirley Jackson, be comfortable in her skin, and just to completely obliterate quantum mechanics. Like, there was something where I kind of saw myself in that. And that definitely, so you have a message from that's saying you can't do this, you're dumb, you're intellectually, you know, there's something, what's the word? Intrinsically wrong with you and problematized about you. You shouldn't be in an Ivy League school, you should be in jail, or you should be causing trouble. And these messages are for real, you know? And I think the acknowledgement of that, and the fact that, like, when I first met Jim, when I was 18 years old, my man, can I tell this story?
Yeah, of course.
All right. So I went to Harvard College, and, you know, like many of us, you're the only, you know, Black this, and so only Black physics major. And, you know, classmates didn't probably want to study with me because they didn't think I could contribute to the study sessions. And it's important that I tell this when I tell the story to students now, I see that as very effective, especially with students of color. And anyway, so I went to a meeting of the National Society of Black Physicists back in 1990. And I get there, and it's all these Black nerds from all across the country, mostly historically Black colleges. And we gathered to basically talk about physics and give seminars and basically, interact and socialize. So this is the first time in my life I actually saw other Black students of physics and physicists. And so it turned out this organization has a president, or has the sort of like, there are a group of people that run the organization that basically started, the founders of the organization. And so I am like, even in that situation, I was shy and I was kind of keeping away from really interacting with people. I was weird and I was shy, and I still had imposter syndrome. And so back then I had dreads. I had some peasy dreads or what have you. And I dressed strangely and all these things, right? I thought I was dressing cool back then. I heard that I was corny from my friends. So anyway, so I'm looking around, there's a little open area where, a little lounge area in this hotel in Washington, D.C., where the conference was taking place. And there were on the order of 1,000 people there, 1,000 Black physicists and our allies. So there were other white physicists and Indian physicists and that kind of stuff at the conference. But it was a reverse. They were the minority. So,
right.
And so to make a long story short, there's some important person is talking. So everybody hustles in to talk to meet this important person. And I'm like, I'm not worthy. So I kind of stay in the lounge area and alone. And I saw this other guy with this huge fro, and he was kind of dressed in this hip way. And he was sitting by himself in front of a computer or something. And I was like, yo, that guy kind of like, he looks like a reggae artist or something like that, So I thought it was like somebody as weird as me. I didn't think he was a physicist. So because of, we all have our own projections too. Remember, we internalize this stuff too, right? So right. I walk up to the reggae artist and I was like, yeah, so yeah, how you doing, man? Are we talking? And I was like, so anyway, who are you? What do you do? He goes, and the guy goes, I'm just a regular dude. Literally, the guy goes, I'm just a regular dude. Like, I just, do my thing. And, who are you? And then he started asking me about me. Come to find out, he's one of the founders, one of the past president of the National Society of Black Physicists, Professor Jim Gates. And then he gave me his phone number. He was like, oh yeah, take my number, da, da, da. Now I'm thinking to myself, wait, this is the big shot. Why is he giving me his phone number? He said, call me. And I was like, yeah, right. This guy don't mean that. Yeah, whatever. I get back to Haverford now. And like one random thing, I was just like, Trump's like, I'm going to call Jim Gates. I'm going to call him. Yeah. But he ain't going to pick up. I'm just going to call. So I call and a woman's voice picks up the phone. Hello. I said, yes, Professor Gates here. She goes, it was his wife, Diana Gates, who's like, a prominent doctor. And she goes, actually, Jim has a headache. He's taking a nap. And I was like, I told you that, this was all a sham, what have you. And about an hour later, the phone rings. This is Jim. And from there on, he was my mentor. So I think going back, these kind of like the reinforcements of knowing that that those stories have been lived and that I was not going through anything unique and new. So like when, it's really important that we understand that we're part of this continuum. Yes. And that I ain't nothing special when it comes to this. Honestly, like others have carried this and have carried a heavier weight. And we are really part of this legacy. And we're carrying on this torch. And kind of like, and I kind of wrote this book in that spirit though, Chris. I wrote this book basically, anyway. So as a kind of like, this is our collective like journey. And this is my contribution to this journey for the next generation. But guess what? Your story, everything you're saying that you're going through, Kat's been through that already. Yes, they have. And you should go and learn, and we can learn about this. And that really is one of the things that really helped me a lot, really in a very visceral way. That helped me. And the other thing was, of course, learning that these major breakthroughs actually, that people that carry this and face these headwinds are more poised actually to make the breakthroughs, and and I really believe that. And so we have to also carry that brunt. It comes with a little bit of, it comes with that penalty. It comes with it. It comes with the territory.
Yeah, well, let me, that's perfect and beautiful, and thank you. Now, one of the things that I know about you is that you have a very wide social circle. You have, you're a really good physicist, and you have brilliant ideas, but you're also a brilliant people person. Somehow,
Some say.
so no, yeah, but somehow you collect a lot of people. But so here's where I'm going with this. In the book, you talk about allies, people that lifted you up. And what I'd love for you to do now, kind of on the fly, is when you think back on those allies, people that helped, and specifically majority folk that helped, what do you think was their defining characteristic as compared to, say, the postdocs who tried to shun you when you were a postdoc, and others of that ilk?
Yeah, I know that there's some serious research in, like, I don't know, cognitive science. We could maybe bring up Brother Malik to talk about this. Malik Boykin,
who's also here at Brown. Yes,
future Nobel Prize winner. I think because this is definitely something I don't understand. There's this idea that there's some communication. There are things that are transmitted that's completely nonverbal, but you can feel it and you know it. So one thing that I did find in common with all these people like David Spergel, and look up these names. Most recently, the mathematician Jim Simons. I was hanging out with Michael Friedman the other day in California, the Fields medalist. I have my list of Leon Cooper, Professor Michael Kosterlitz when I was a student here at Brown.
Another Nobelist.
Yeah, and that's before he won the Nobel Prize. Many years before he won the Nobel Prize, and he. One of the things I found is that, okay, when they engage us, there's an energy they put forth as if they think you're smart, they think you have something useful to give. I don't know. It's a vibe they give. It's a resonance that it's rather than there's something wrong with you, I'm going to hold my purse back. I think you guys going to I'm going to. Well, something that happens to me a lot, not a lot, but it breaks my heart a lot. It's I thought it used to happen only at nighttime, but in the middle of the daytime, I'm walking down the sidewalk in the middle of campus, and it's me and another person alone, and the person sees me coming and they cross the street mid-street, or I'm walking behind somebody. These are nonverbal things, right? So that's kind of the opposite of this. What I'm saying is that they do the opposite. They bring you in, they lean on you for tell me the cool idea, and you say something to them if you're talking science, and they're really listening, and they're like, yeah, that's, wow, that's pretty brilliant. Yeah, tell me more. And they mean it. Like David Spergel, that's happened to me 15 years ago when I was a postdoc at Stanford, and I had this idea that people just this guy is a nut job, and he was visiting from Princeton, and he's probably the most prominent, one of the most prominent cosmologists on Earth, and David was visiting, and everybody wanted a piece of him, and he, in the middle of everyone, he goes, "Stephon, what are you thinking about?" It was the first time someone asked me what I was thinking about, and especially in front of everybody else, right, and the other reindeers in the reindeer games.
Right.
And
beautiful metaphor.
So Santa Claus. So Santa, looked at my red nose, and he was like, what's that? No, and he was just like, what are you thinking about? And I said this idea, and I saw smirks. I saw other people going, yeah, there goes Stephon again with his crazy ideas or idiotic whatever. And he goes to me, oh, that's really interesting. You mean you're telling me that if this happens and the gravitational waves doing this, that? He goes, when you come back out East Coast, come visit me at Princeton. Let's talk more about that.
Now, here, let me interrupt a little bit there.
By the way, that was $1 million grant 15 years later from the Simons Foundation.
Well, good ideas will out. Yeah. Okay, that's part of the punchline. But the other piece is what you've described is a curiosity and warmth can you speak to the intellectual prowess of these people? I think you've done that, kind of, but is there, not to be snooty, but is there a disparity? So are the haters maybe not as enlightened even when it comes to the physics?
I mean, to be frank, my judgment is yes. I mean, you know, my just from my only experience, and again,
yeah, and that's all I'm asking. This is not a study.
The study of Jim, and Jim would say the same thing, like Feynman, like Ed Witten. I mean, like when you think about like in my field, it's really interesting that not all the top, but like a handful of top physicists, Nobel Prize winners, they don't, on average, seem to have a problem with with me, with this, with the ways in which I am, the expectations, the stereotypes. Let me actually, the National Society of Black Physicists, it was founded almost 50 years ago. You know why? Because 2 Nobel Prize winning physicists, right, came out publicly and said that African American physicists are genetically incapacitated to do. We are genetically inferior, so we can't do physics and math.
Was that Bardeen?
These are powerful.
Was that Bardeen?
Bardeen and Shockley, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
No. I'm sorry. No. It was
Well, definitely Shockley.
It was Shockley and Watson, not Bardeen. No.
Oh,
Bardeen,
Watson, yeah.
Yeah, Watson and Bardeen. I mean, and Shockley.
Watson and Shockley, right?
Yeah.
DNA and transistor.
Yeah, and so these are powerful people. The consequences of that is that if you go to apply for grants, remember these people place people in powerful positions, right? So if that's their opinion, that if you're Black, you're genetically inferior, you cannot do math and physics, that's a problem. And then when the few Black physicists at the time kind of try to push back on that, one of the biggest organizations in physics was silent on it. I mean, the big irony of this is that now, Jim Gates just finished his term as a president of the American Physical Society. So, they've definitely turned around in a major way. It's a big irony, actually.
Right.
But I guess what I'm saying is that, it remains a mystery. It's not really a mystery. It's more like, if you are not at that level, maybe also your judgment is also not at that level. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So, look, I guess we may be running into our time. We'd like to do some questions, from the audience, obviously. But I guess, there was so much covered in the book, and I really feel that it was a tour de force of physics. So if somebody was expecting to see something else, especially with that provocative title, what they got was a taste of what it's like to be an African-American physicist coming up through the ranks and trying to ply your trade with something you love. Because frankly, if you're like the rest of us, you really can't do anything else. This is what you do. And even if you were driving a bus, for example, like my father did, you'd still be doing equations at night, on the side, just for the heck of it. So let me ask you this. Why did you name the book the way you did?
Oh, yeah.
What is the encapsulating thing that made that title sing for you?
Yes, very good. Thank you. And let me also, and to this is connected to that question. I think it's that passion. The other thing that he said that gives us the that extra momentum to go through the headwinds is that this undying passion and love for what we do. I've always, I was always an inquisitive kid. And also the realization that our culture is very much part of our culture. We have a very intellectual culture. Now it's expressed, bebop jazz is, I cannot find anything more intellectual in terms of the cognitive, mind twists and, the mathematics be inherent, our what's the word? Anyway, so my point is that we, hip hop is part of our culture. Right. It's very intellectual culture. So my fascination for physics and things like that, or other people's fascination, what we do, that's kind of like, yeah, that was the other thing, that passion is undying. As you're talking about your dad, I could have been, imagine if I never got tenure, I'd still be trying to do physics, okay? And now connected to that, why the title? I didn't, I realized that it's not, somebody else is gonna more, I would say more able, should write a book about kind of like what it's like, what it's really like, and an analysis of what it's like to be a Black scientist that's actually trying to solve the big problems,
Yes.
like what we're doing here at Brown. And Brown is we're very, Brown is invested in, because Brown believes in that, and like no other institution in the United States. And I say that, I was at Berkeley, I said that in public when I gave a talk at Berkeley, a public talk the other day, because I believe it. And I think that so the title was really wanted to encapsulate, not to talk about it, but to demonstrate fear of to demonstrate brother Glenn Laurie, one of the things, he wrote a book called The Anatomy of Racial Inequality. And I read that book, and one of the things that he axiomatized in this book about what could be behind racial inequality is stigma, is this idea that Black people, first, it's a more generalized thing, that this notion of stigma, but we carry the stigma, and somehow, of course, because it's imprinted on us, we can't shake that stigma like other groups might be able to do better, by whatever,
Yeah, caste.
Yeah, caste.
Like Isabel's book.
Like the book that I'm seeing right there, that I'm reading right now, actually.
Right.
I'm actually reading that book. It's dope. And so I think that I wanted to sort of demonstrate that through telling the story, demonstrate that by exposing the Black ideas, the ideas that are going to stigmatize. So the book was actually an exploration of that fear, and actually my own fear, the fear of stigma, the fear of like when you encounter stigma. But it was a play on words too, because it had a triple meaning, like a quantum entangled state. It was also a nod to Public Enemy, and in Public Enemy, remember, Fear of the Black Planet, was this idea that what happens if the planet becomes dominated by, well, actually does, but our country now becomes dominated by, not dominated, but most of the population grows to be 90-something% Black and Latinx people, right? Is there some intrinsic fear for that to happen? And so it was a play on that, what happens maybe if that I really believe that we're going to have Nobel Prize winners, Black Nobel Prize winners in the sciences. I really believe that. I believe it's going to happen in the next generation. I think we're poisoned for that to happen. I want that to happen. And this book was a way of inspiring the next generation to say, here are some things like oblique strategies that John Cage and Brian Eno wrote for the art world. I wanted to write my oblique strategies for young scientists of color and scientists that may find themselves in that stigmatized Black space in the way that Glenn talked about as race being a form of stigma. That scientific idea, scientific thought, if you think the wrong thing, if you think against the grain, it may stigmatize you like it did with Michael Faraday. And how do you navigate that? How do you celebrate that? It was not a complaint, but it was a celebration in the same way that Public Enemy's album, became a #1 thing and everybody got behind it. Not just Black kids, not just whatever, but like everybody else, so that's kind of, I can go on and on, but that's in a sense what I was hoping that title would evoke.
No, and I completely understand. So, thank you for that. And I think at this point, if Stephanie or Elias are around, we should take some questions. I have to, since I'm a dinosaur and can't see otherwise, I'm going to put on my glasses and I'm going to open up our Q&A. It says request the citation for the PNAS article. I don't have it in front of me. Stephon, it's probably in Stephon's book somewhere, but
it is cited,
it appeared
cited.
It appeared COVID summer, I believe, so 2020, and it's in PNAS. And what you should do is, what's the title again? The innovation paradox. So
the diversity innovation paradox.
Right. So search for those titles, and then PNAS. And there's also an overarching or a synopsis article that appears somewhere. I think it might be in the Stanford Rag or something like that, because it was Stanford scientists who did it.
And I devoted an entire chapter called "If Basquiat Were a Physicist" in the book too. I use that idea to actually imagine what it would be like if Basquiat were a physicist.
One thing that really tickled my fancy about the book, and I think it was either the last chapter or the chapter before the last chapter, and you know what I'm talking about, was so it's kind of funny. And this is something that I think is people like us that somehow swam upstream, and because there was no other choice. This is the only thing that we can do. This is what we love to do. Always end up asking some of the big questions. So, by training, I'm an engineer, and I'm not supposed to be a scientist. I'm not supposed to ask big questions. And I fell into the big question of why do we know whether we're alone or not? So Stephon has a chapter in the book that was about the Fermi paradox. And the Fermi paradox, Enrico Fermi, big deal physicist, asked the following question. And let me preface that, people like John Johnson, who's an astronomer at Harvard, he's a planet hunter. So, he's one of those people that's discovering that there are planets around other suns. That was not known 20 years ago. It wasn't something that we knew. Now we know it, and we're documenting it. So the notion that there might be life around other planets, that's not that's not crazy anymore, because we know there are planets, and we're beginning to understand what their structure is. So Fermi asked the following question: if the aliens are all out there, where are they? Why haven't we seen them? And it seemed like a very and Fermi had a knack for asking the annoying question that when you just want to dismiss it. You want to say, go back to your box, Fermi, but you can't. So Stephon actually has a chapter in there devoted to one of the most creative ways of looking at the question that I've seen. And it has to do with aliens doing quantum computing. And if you could kind of limn that argument for a broad audience, that would be really nice. Because I think it was one of the most, that had to be one of the most daring and creative things to say in public, but supported. I mean, you supported it with physics.
Yes. So this was very much in the tradition. One of the things I wanted to do in the book was to demonstrate how you actually do thought experiments and why they absolutely need to be as absurd as possible so that you can learn something new. It can basically suspend you away. It's like playing outside the chord changes, right? You play outside the changes, and then when you come back, it's just like, okay, I'm hearing things now. And I wrote that actually. That was something that I wrote together with it was part of a thought experiment I had with my friend, Jaron Lanier, who was one of the pioneers of virtual reality. And we actually was going on a walk in Berkeley Hills 20 years ago, or something like that. And we had this idea, so he's a virtual reality pioneer. So obviously it had to deal with virtual reality. In a nutshell, the idea is, Jaron, observed, we want to understand like what could really be behind dark energy and dark matter. There's all this extra energy that could be there. And so the idea was, well, maybe what really the dark energy really is and why there's a lot less of it than we actually observe. And I talk about that in the book. So, if you want to know about that, I got to read a whole chapter about dark energy and dark matter. But the issue here is that there should be a lot more energy out there. And why aren't we seeing this energy according to our standard understanding of physics? And the crazy thought was, well, actually, most of our energy consumption now, aside from now cryptocurrency, for computers is actually in gaming. All right, like the most advanced computers and parallel computers actually are not coming for computers that simulate colliding black holes. It's actually, computation, the resources, the most complex computation involved have to do with entertainment. So the idea is like, okay, if I'm at a really, really advanced alien civilization, like how advanced? I remember our technology is basically 100 years old, okay? So humanity came on the scene, and only in 100 years of how long we've existed, okay, hundreds of thousands of years maybe, in a wink of an eye of time, we think we're so advanced. But imagine a civilization that is, 1 billion years more advanced than we are. Imagine the computers that they have, and what do you think they're going to be doing with that? They're going to be playing really advanced virtual reality video games. The virtual reality is so real, it actually might simulate people that actually think that they're real. So anyway, so that was an interesting thing. But how do they do this? Well, they use dark energy to run these supercomputers. Okay, I know people are laughing. They're like, okay, Stephon Alexander, John Lear are completely, these people are nuts. Here's what's really interesting about this. What does it take for a quantum computer to actually work? Why would challenge to actually build one? Quantum mechanics, the effects, the magic of quantum mechanics get completely washed out when you turn temperature on. So quantum mechanics works best when the temperature is as close to absolute zero, minus 273 degrees below what we call zero, okay? The colder the environment is, the best chance you have to make a quantum computer work, okay? Imagine imagine our future. Imagine that we don't destroy ourselves in 1 billion years, okay? Which is, we keep our fingers crossed, okay? But imagine that we continue to live for billions of years to the point where our star, our own sun, which heats up the earth and gives birth to life. The sun actually goes through a cold death and it dies.
Right.
Well, guess what? That's an environment that's best fit for a quantum computer. So if humanity manages to build a quantum computer right before the sun dies, right, and we upload our consciousness and all that stuff into the quantum computer, that's the advanced alien civilization. And that's why we're looking in the wrong direction to find them. We shouldn't be looking at star systems. We should be looking at the most void and empty places to find future alien civilizations that are actually uploaded to quantum computers in very cold environments, because that's the environment they need.
Right.
And dark energy is actually something that's happening. The temperature associated with dark energy is something having to do with a milli-electron volt, actually. A temperature
okay,
that's
so really cold.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the basic. I mean,
and that's really that's really cool. I mean, and you know, because you know, looking around stars is what we do, right?
Right.
I prefaced it with John Johnson's work. So we have a few questions in the chat, and I want to ask them in reverse order. And if your name is up there, I'm going to say your name, and you know, you can start screaming now if that's bad, but I'm going to say your name because it's much better, you know, to associate you know, a name with.
I love absurd and hard questions. I love absurd and hard questions.
Well, you know, the first one is not absurd and hard. It's regarding someone both you and I know well and respect. The question is from Linda Foinding, and she thanks you for the wonderful conversation, and she mentions Chanda's book, Disordered Cosmos. So, you know, I guess, you know, where she talks about her experience as a Black woman physicist, which is so if you had to be twice as smart, you know, if we had to be as men twice as smart as a woman, she had to be 4 times as smart, is the point. So, you know, for me at least, it's really cool that you guys put out your books roughly at the same time. And frankly, I think that's probably unprecedented. I don't think that there's.
It is unprecedented.
And, you know, and I discount Neil deGrasse Tyson because he's he's always been more of a public-facing physicist. Both you and Chanda are practicing physicists. So you know, how do you feel about that? You know, that the two of you are up here dancing in the public eye as physicists.
Yeah, I think, I mean, first of all, it's a wonderful book. I haven't gotten through all of it yet because you know, because of the other reading that I want to get through Cass first. But I think it was, you know, our books definitely, I would say, also complemented each other.
Yes.
And Chanda also, you know, is doing groundbreaking research in dark matter. So highly recommend the book. And, you know, I definitely look through some of it. And, you know, first of all, it's very well written, number one. And I really love her metaphors. Like, she really used very interesting and unique and creative metaphors. And, you know, I mean, Chanda's another person that really, thinks outside the box, and
Yep.
in this tradition as well, right? And she her PhD advisor was Lee Smolin, who was actually a
Yep.
very close friend of mine. And I actually introduced Chanda when Chanda expressed the interest in going into like theoretical physics and quantum gravity to Lee. So we're kind of connected in that way. And
Right.
so I applaud it. Yes, thanks for asking the question.
So for me, Chanda Prescott Weinstein, I just, and you guys doing these books together, not together, but these two books out there is just a pleasure. Now there's an anonymous question, and this one is going to hit close to home. So anonymous attendee asks, how might young scientists seek out diverse ideas if their institution does not seem to promote them? So I'll repeat. How might young scientists seek out diverse ideas if their institution does not seek to promote them?
Yeah, great. This is why the National Society of Black Physicists and NSBE, National Society of Black Engineers, and other organizations of that ilk do exist. I mean, one of the things we do very actively at the National Society of Black Physicists, I'm the president, and over the last 2 years, like we have really, especially during the pandemic, and getting on our training wheels, learning how to really maximize the use of virtual technology, is that we plug in with each other. So we realize that we're not alone, even though at your home institution you may not be, meeting those needs. It can certainly be met, and we're very actively doing that in physics, at least for the National Society of Black Physicists. Go on our website, and we're doing some amazing things. Really. The leadership is with the students, actually. The president of our student council is actually at Brown, Farrah Simpson. Yep. And by the way, can I brag? We produced Samantha Sullivan at Harvard. She's a Black woman physicist, graduating this year. NSBP, National Society of Black Physicists Student Council, is the first African-American woman physicist to win the Rhodes Scholarship.
Right.
So she'll be going to Oxford next year from Harvard. And she is, we're proud, and there's more coming. Delilah Gates at Princeton. I'm talking about the next generation.
Right.
It's Morgan Koenig. She's just starting a postdoc. These are all cosmologists, by the way, people in and theoretical physicists. So people we work very closely with and meet every week, actually. And talk physics and do calculations and things like that. So it's very exciting. And so anyway, that's one way. We actually do this. It's really important, I think, going back to realize actually, even if in your home environment, you're not getting those needs met, that the minute you realize that there's a bigger world out there and you're actually plugged in with that. And Chris, you've really done a great job at again, I'm embarrassing you again, but you've really done a great job at really supporting junior faculty, junior colleagues in that way. And it's really worked with all the awards people have been getting and all the breakthroughs people are making.
Well, we have a unique place here. And to anonymous attendee who asked that question, I'd also point you to if physics is, frankly, information theory is really the end all and be all of everything. And, that's a joke that Stephon, Jim, and us have. The academic one-upsmanship is that mine consumes yours. But if you're not specifically into physics, we have a group here called STEM Jazz. And it was modeled after Stephon's first book, The Jazz of Physics, where a bunch of us get together and just talk the science, and it can be electric and magical. And as Stephon said, our training wheels got taken off for the virtual stuff by COVID. So now, we can actually interact in all sorts of ways, and we don't have to be specifically in Providence to do it. So you're welcome
can I add
to.
Something to that?
Please, please.
I'm excited about. Totally forgot to mention one thing that is really, really important, Chris. And I think it's something that would, again, I hate to be a Brunonian in this sense, and but whatever. I'm proud. One of the things that I really pressed, and we really pressed, and I learned so much from STEMJET, from the community here, that really impacted, what we did at NSBP, is for us to embrace and really push for not only being the only one in the room. you know, there's an interesting paradox, which is sometimes if we internalize being the only one, that means that maybe I'm the only special one because I'm the only one that can bear it. And therefore, you know, if others come in the room, I'm talking about other minorities.
Yes, understood.
Scientists, But one of the things that is really important in terms of building the strength and gaining all these extra tools for success is for us to embrace having others, hire more of us in the same department and push for that, and not only be the only one in the room and then complain about it, but you're not like too comfortable with having others around you, right? So this is something I feel really passionate about. And you know, we get to practice that here at Brown, right? I mean, you know,
most definitely.
And that's a whole other conversation.
And that is a conversation. That's a conversation that I'll leave to my brilliant sister, who understands the whole race, the race issue. But it is something. It's a proximity sort of question, and I'll just leave it at that because I am not versed, and I don't want to. And Tricia will slap me, you know. So I'm not going to be. I don't want to be slapped in public. So let me ask some more questions because we have another question. Thanking you for the wonderful book and talk. And this is another one that can kind of hit close to home. Can you speak to the question of, and this is from Kelly Moore, can you speak to the question of appropriation and theft in your experience in the contest, excuse me, for scientific credit? Did this issue come up for you?
Yeah.
Shall I repeat the question?
No, I get the question. Yes, and it's a very good question. It's a really good question. In fact, you know, like there's a chapter in my book where I don't analyze it. I don't talk about it explicitly, but I tell stories about some interesting contemporary. The answer is yes, yes, yes. But to me, it's you know, meaning that like again, this is all anecdotal. Chris and I, we can put money on this, right? We have colleagues and friends ourselves where this happens, right? You know, and of course, the parallel to this is eerily related to, you know, hip hop and related to rock music and related to jazz and all the things that, again, we create and innovate, and then somehow it's more palpable. I don't know what the word is, you know, or appropriated in this way. And this is the kind of thing where Tricia and Stephanie, and please help us out, help us understand this. But I would say it's really interesting because it's almost as if like, if you have, so there was a time, this happened to me, I would say 3 concrete times where the idea came about and it wasn't taken seriously. And in fact, it was probably even laughed at. And then somebody else had the idea, they pursued it, and then somehow convinced themselves that what I said had nothing. There was a kind of a strange, eerie invisibility. And I don't get it. I still, one of the things, like, it still perplexes me. It does happen, but it isn't like people are deliberately saying, well, you know, there's a kind of invisibility, almost a muteness. Mm-hmm. You know, you're right, Chris. What are your thoughts about it? I think you might have something.
I'm going to, in the interests of not, you know, speaking to things that I have not carefully researched, because that is a hot button issue in science. In advertising, you know, you just steal people's stuff, and you know that's the way it works. As scientists, we build an edifice that builds on everybody's contributions, and credit assignment is a real thing, and it makes or breaks careers. So I will say that, and this is something that I've seen in meetings. I've seen with women. I've seen women in meetings speak up about a particular topic, and nobody says anything about it. And then suddenly a man says something about it, and it's a brilliant idea suddenly. And the woman said it, you know, 10 minutes, half an hour ago. So that is a real sort of thing. And you speak about this in your book, that the provenance or the well, provenance, from whence it comes, does matter for fitting things into the technological and scientific zeitgeist. And that PNAS paper speaks exactly to that as well. So if innovation is higher, you would expect it to be incorporated at higher rates. It's not.
And rewarded.
Yes, and definitely rewarded. So, you know, and the pointed question was, did this come up for you? And, you know, I'll leave it at that. You know, you've answered the question. So Kelly, hopefully that was enough. And I'll move on to the next question. So this one is from anonymous attendee. Do you, Stephon, have a migrant background that might have added to the challenges in becoming a Black physicist?
A what background?
Migrant. So I guess that immigrant is what I think that means. And anonymous attendee, please correct me, you know, if I'm misinterpreting your question.
You know, I think in a lot of ways, if you are a Black, I mean, again, I can only speak from what I know, okay? A Black scientist in America, and you've spent a lot of time in this country, even if you're an immigrant and you've been here for a long time, or you're born here, I think that you naturally, by definition, that state of being of navigating and trying to, you know, move through, there is a kind of what's the word? Not a gypsy. There's this thing when you are a nomad. You are like so. Let's say if you're an African American physicist, you're born in America, right? One of the things I've observed about other African American physicists is that they're kind of nomadic too, because you have to move around. I mean, you have to move around, go to lands and deserts and places, right? And I'm saying those things metaphorically, where you are a gypsy, you are, right? And I think that's a migrant. I think we all, so the answer is yes, but not in the sense of being an immigrant. You know, so I'd say I'll paraphrase what you're saying, and you can correct me, but I think what you're saying is that you have to be intellectually broad, intellectually flexible, and somewhat fearless. Yeah, you have to travel to all these other intellectual and lands, you know, these other worlds and universes, which actually means somebody signed, you know, you get invited to give a talk, and you know that you're going to go walk into that room, and people are not expecting you to say anything useful, what have you, right? Or you actually don't feel welcome in those spaces. That's kind of like the state of being a gypsy, as far as I'm concerned. I feel like, I mean, I have a good friend that is a gypsy, so we trade notes on this. He's a gypsy from the south of Spain, and you know, but you know, I grew up in the Bronx, New York. I did live Trinidad when I was like 7 years old. And I strongly self-identify as an African American because that's what I knew, you know, in terms of my experiences. So in that sense, I really, you know, I didn't come to America like in my 20s or come to go to, maybe that there is a difference there, but I just don't have that experience. I'm a kid from the Bronx, basically. Right. Now, you know, so amplifying on what you said. So, and you know, again, I have to go back to information theory. There's the. I mean, I love Trinidadian food and music, but you know. Look. We all come from somewhere, and exactly. it wasn't here. Right. So, but I guess one of the things that really resonated about what you said, and you know, this is kind of tying things not up in a bow, but about how individuals, how you can affect change. So I realized I was interested in, I was peripatetic in some respects, as you were. I did a lot of music when I was a kid, went to MIT, was doing biophysics, realized that I didn't want to drive a cab because, you know, at the time physicists were driving cabs, ended up being an electrical engineer. So I migrated to information theory because it's kind of like the physics of electrical engineering, quite honestly. It is. You know, it's our future. It's one of the future of physics, actually. I kind of talk, you know, I'll leave you to write that book. Well, we will write that book, but I believe that. But here's the thing. That was a very uninviting society for the longest time. When I was I won't say postdoc, I spent some time at Bell Laboratories as a member of technical staff, which was a kind of equivalent to a postdoc in terms of seasoning.
and then as a young professor. What changed that society was a triptych of brilliant women who came in and didn't try to, and were themselves, is the point. They didn't try to be like the men in the society.
Right.
And what was amazing and it is held to this day is that they changed the face of that society by being there, by being themselves, by encouraging the young folks. And I've really taken that to heart, as you have, in your own way as well. So I think that, in terms of the future, and trying to inspire kids and folks that are listening to this who might want to pursue STEM careers, physics in particular, but anything else, is that you can make a difference. And for established people, you can make a difference if you band together, be yourselves, and produce at the levels that you can. And part of that requires certain self-confidence. It requires some degree of brilliance, but the fact that you're here already means that you have some degree of brilliance.
Absolutely.
So, and I think that that's what I take away from your book, in the way that you deal with the physics, and it's a tour de force of physics, but there is that subtext of, here I am, I've done all of these things. This is how physics is going to be advanced, and you should be part of it too. And for that, I applaud you. I think that that's really a fantastic message. And it's not overdone. It's not, you weren't beating people over the head with it throughout the book, but the fact of your existence, of Chanda's existence, of Jim's existence, of Nadia's existence, all of these people, it makes this old man, this increasingly old man, happier about the potential future of us in STEM fields.